Hi, I'm Pete Maldonado, the CEO of Chomps, and I'm excited to welcome you to Chompcast, a Chomps original podcast where we'll have 15 to 30-minute fireside chats focused on the CPG industry.
And I'm Rashid, the COO. Together, we'll be sharing valuable insights, advice, and real-world examples with aspiring and current business owners. We're happy to have you here along for the ride.
Welcome to Chompcast episode 5, where we interview Ibraheem Basir, the CEO and founder of A Dozen Cousins. All right, Ibraheem, great to meet you. Thank you for being on the show today, and looking forward to hearing from you. Would you mind telling us a little bit about you and the brand?
Yeah, my name's Ibraheem Basir. I'm the founder and CEO of A Dozen Cousins. I grew up in Brooklyn in a really big family, so I have 9 siblings, 11 nieces and nephews. When my daughter was first born, she was the 12th cousin, which is where the brand gets its name from, and it's one of the most common questions we get is about those dozen cousins. And we just grew up loving food. We were in a really food-loving family where that was in many ways the glue for all of our gatherings, our time spent together, and so I've always known that I wanted to work in the food industry. In terms of A Dozen Cousins, what we do is we make authentic meals and side dishes that are inspired by traditional Creole, Caribbean, and Latin American foods. So we started off with a line of ready-to-eat beans. We've since moved into the rice category, as well as the cooking and seasoning sauce category.
Awesome, Ibraheem. Good to meet you, and thanks for being on the show. It's interesting. We talked to fellow founders, everyone's background, kind of the road that led them to today, and looking at your background, going from General Mills to Annie's, which is quite an iconic natural better for you brand, to now doing your own thing. Like, what's the origin story? Like, how did you make that transition?
Yeah, so I started off at General Mills. As I said, food was really central to our just family life and my upbringing. So I actually knew I wanted to work in the food industry for like most of my early adult life, right? And so I went and got my MBA and immediately went to go work at a CPG company. I wanted to be in the world of creating, sharing, and enjoying food. And so, when I started at General Mills, I actually didn't know much about natural and organic anything. I didn't even know what a GMO was, and I always joke, I didn't really care at the time, right? If it tasted good and it was fun to eat, I was on board. And so, it was during the course of my time at General Mills that I actually started learning more and more about natural products. I had a chance to work on Bar, which is, a really simple brand made out of fruit and nuts. Then when General Mills acquired Annie's, had a chance to go and work on that business. And, I just really fell in love with the ethos of the natural product industry, right? The idea that businesses could be a force for good in the world, right? That they could have a mission which was more than just making money. That really resonated with me. And then I also just learned a lot more about sourcing, ingredient quality, nutrition, et cetera. And so that was kind of the things that led me to want to do my own thing. And I'll pause there for a moment. I can keep going, as you can imagine, but I'll pause.
That's awesome. It's always good to hear and kind of how it came about, because taking the plunge is a big thing. How did you go about like getting it off the ground? Are you, from a manufacturing process, are you co-man? Are you vertically integrated? How did you start, and what are you doing right now?
Yeah, so I guess maybe just to bridge the gap between the previous question and this one, when I was at Annie's, I started to have this feeling of like, I love the natural industry. I loved everything a lot of the brands stood for, but from a personal perspective, so many of them didn't make the foods and flavors that I had grown up eating. You know what I mean? And so when I started A Dozen Cousins, the goal really was to try to bring in some of the culture, the joy, the foods that I had been growing up eating. And so we launched, we started with our beans and moved into some of those other categories. And to your most recent question, we work with a co-packer. We started off as lean as we could, and working with the co-man was part of that strategy, right? It allowed us to get up and running with our first 2 or 3 SKUs, test out the market, see if we had something, and we actually have partners now that we really like and enjoy working with.
Awesome. And then, so if I think about your lineup, right, you've got the beans, you've got rices and sauces. What triggered kind of going into the different directions? Was it like customers asking for it, retailers asking for it? Was it always the thought process or strategy? It's always helpful to kind of understand like your thought process in expanding.
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in like need states, right? And so like for us, the need state that we're playing in is like simple weeknight dinner, right? Like if you just roll it up to the highest level. So you get home from work, you get home from school, you have 20 minutes, You want to put something on the table that feels high quality, high taste, you actually want to eat. And so from the time that I started the business, the goal for me has always been to work our way around the dinner plate, right? If you just think about what that means here in the US, that's a grain, a protein, some type of vegetable, and that's a meal. And so, in reality, I've had a roadmap of categories that we wanted to go into that I felt like they were connected and adjacent. Along the way, though, we've been listening to consumers, hearing feedback, seeing what they thought should be next, right? Where do they have maybe the highest purchase interest, right? And so we started with beans, and as you can imagine, half of the time that people reached out to us, rice was somehow involved in the comment, right? It was either, what rice do you recommend? Are you guys going to make rice? Or we look at our Amazon purchases and see the most commonly cross-purchased items with a dozen cousins beans was all these rice brands, right? And so I was like, okay, we know that consumers are using it in that way. Why don't we go ahead and give them a rice from us, make it easy, right? And so that was in the case of the rices. And then we got to the entree sauces, which we launched earlier this year. And it was the same deal, right? Where I was like, the entree is the star of the dinner plate in many ways, right? And so it was like, we had all the backup singers. We were like, we'll go get the lead singer. And now we have a lot of entree sauces where you can make jerk chicken, pollo alla brasa, pollo asado, et cetera. So a little bit to answer your question of both, where we had a predefined plan, and then we've kind of listened along the way to help prioritize and validate.
Got it. You mentioned, your time at General Mills, it's almost an educational process as far as like getting more aware of GMOs and ingredients. And I'm curious of your sourcing strategy. Like, how do you go about finding the ingredients you use and any principles you follow?
Yeah, so we have really, three big principles when it comes to our sourcing. First and foremost, everything we do is non-GMO. Most of our products are non-GMO project verified. I think there's healthy debate about how dangerous GMOs are or aren't. Our stance is that we can make the foods we want to make without GMOs, so there's not a need for us, right? So that's the first thing. Second thing is, very simply like pantry-friendly ingredients, right? So we want people, when they read our product, to understand everything that's in there and to feel like I can match this, right? I know what onion is, I know what garlic is, I know what bell pepper is, right? We try to stay away from things that are, really industrial type ingredients or things that people wouldn't normally cook with at home. And then the third thing, which is really just in many ways, like to me, should be the bare minimum for any company selling anything, and that's around like forced labor, child labor, making sure that our ingredient suppliers are, on the right side of those issues. So those are three things that we focus on as it relates to, our sourcing. Yeah.
Awesome.
So one of the questions I have for you, Ibrahim, is around brand positioning, and then like you play in some pretty, crowded categories, just like we do. And one of the things I always think about is like, how do you position yourselves, and what's the messaging, and like what's the big differentiator, and how do you think about that and going forward?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. For us, we really want our brand to live at this intersection of food and culture, right? And so if you spend time on like our website, our Instagram, we spend just as much time talking about art and music and history as we do talking about beans, rice, and cooking sauces. You know what I mean? And so when people think about our brand, what we hope is that they think about us as people who are, first of all, from the places that we talk about, right? Creole, Caribbean, Latin American foods. Our team is 100% minority or multi-ethnic in background. A lot of our influencers and partners come from the places that we pull our foods and our recipes from. And so, we really want to get across this feeling of like cultural authenticity, representation of the foods that we're making. And we want people to feel like they're at home. Like if you look even at our packaging, so much of it is hand drawn. You have these like doodles of the cousins, you have the cultural iconography. Again, it's really to give this feeling of culture, this feeling of family, this feeling of home. In terms of the products, you guys know that, there's nuts and bolts things that we do to separate ourselves. But I would say from a big picture differentiation for us, it's really more on the brand and who we are as a company.
It's awesome. Sounds like as much a lifestyle brand as it is a food brand. So
we try to be that way. Yeah, we try to be that way for sure.
I love that. So you mentioned a lot of these international locations and where you're taking this inspiration from. Are you from a distribution standpoint? Are you guys only domestic, or are you international?
Today we're focused in the U.S. We do sell on Amazon in Canada, but for the most part, we haven't really gotten into international distribution yet. We're focused still on the U.S. We feel like we have a lot of room to grow, a lot of opportunity here at home.
And then I think, I read somewhere that you guys may have been one of the first rices that were cooked in bone broth. Is that true?
We are, to my knowledge, still the only one. I'm sure that will change at some point, but I've yet to see the next one. It was just, it was a really unique concept. As I mentioned, we knew we wanted to play in the rice category. It's such a saturated space, and rice itself, plain rice is pretty good, right? You can just cook jasmine rice, and for most people, that's fine. And so for us, we just set a bar for ourselves to say, look, if we're going to enter the category, we need to find an angle that's actually meaningfully different and better than what's out there versus just putting our brand on a product that you could already get. And so we spent about 2 years getting it right in terms of the texture, the taste, using the right bone broth, being able to get enough of the protein into the product that we felt good about it. So it was definitely a journey, but now we have a great product, really beloved by our customers.
Yeah, it definitely it sets you apart from the field and introduces additional nutritional benefits than just traditional rice, which is great to see. I mean, looking at your brand and just hearing you speak, obviously there's a real passion for diversity, equality, inclusion. Where did that come from? I know Brooklyn's a very rich culture of broad ethnicities, and I'm just curious, where did it really come from?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the starting point, right? I grew up in Brooklyn, which I want to say at one point in time is actually was home to the most diverse zip code in the U.S. in terms of the number of different languages spoken, country of origins represented within the borough, right? So that feeling, first of all, of just global food, global flavors is something I grew up in, right? Like my mother would be at the laundromat and come home with a recipe scribbled on a little note of paper because, she was talking to one of our neighbors and they exchanged recipes for one dish or another. She sometimes had people over our house showing her how to make a certain type of bread, right? So it's like this feeling of cultural exchange and food was kind of always part of me, as a youth. And then I would say, as you grow up, I'm African-American by descent. The reality situation is I'm almost always a minority in the spaces that I've been in, right? Whether that is undergrad, grad school, starting my career, Fortune 500, public company, to now even as an entrepreneur in the CPG space, right? So there's always the feeling of wanting to open up a door, wanting to create an opportunity, wanting, the country's really vibrant, really diverse, and I just want the spaces that I'm participating in to reflect that. You know what I mean? And so it is a passion point for me and for our company.
Well said. And can you tell us a little bit about Project Potluck? I was reading a bit about your involvement there, which sounds like a fantastic initiative. Yeah,
for sure. It's an extension really of what we just talked about, right? The feeling that if you look into the U.S. population, about half of the people in the U.S. identify as being from a minority group, right? Depending on the data source, it might be a little bit above that, a little bit below that, but it's about half. If you look at our industry, particularly in the natural product world, at people of color who have board seats, who sit on leadership teams, who lead companies, the number is closer to 10 to 15%, right? So that delta is, of course, that representation gap, right? And so, it'll take a while to get our industry to reflect the country at large, but that was the goal with Project Potluck, right? How do we help people of color build successful companies and careers in the space? And ultimately, how do we get to a point where if you looked at the leadership teams in our industry, it would actually reflect what you see in the country at large. We have, just to speak a little bit about the programming, we recently brought on an executive director, Kathleen Casanova, so she leads everything on the day-to-day. We have a mentorship program where we pair up-and-coming talent in the industry with, veterans and people who have done what they're trying to do. We have education events and webinars. We have social events, at conferences. And so the goal is, again, to make the industry feel not only more diverse, but more welcoming for diverse talent. And I'm really proud of the work we've done so far.
If the listeners want to get involved, where can they go to learn more?
Potluckcpg.org. That's your starting point. That's our website. You'll find an opportunity to apply for programming, to join our mailing list, to donate. And so that's definitely the starting point.
Awesome. Okay. One question I always like to ask folks is, if you were to have your, redo your education and in early career, would you have changed anything based on what you know now?
Man, first of all, it's an excellent question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that. I'm going to think through this in real time. First of all, I studied history as an undergrad. When I first started my collegiate career, I didn't know 100% what I was going to do with that degree, but I loved history. I loved storytelling. Like that always drew me in. And so I really, pursued it for passion. And I wouldn't change that, honestly. I think, as a marketer, which I view myself first and foremost as a marketer, even though, of course, I'm, a CEO and a founder, think of myself as a marketer and a brand builder. I think having that context about human behavior, about history, about the way that ideas flow, I actually really value it. I don't actually think I would have, maybe the easy answer is to say I would go back and study business. But I don't think I would. I think I really enjoyed that time spent studying the humanities and the social sciences and really just kind of creating a toolkit of reference points that I pull from even today, right, in terms of like stories, anecdotes, etc. So that's what I did as an undergrad. And then as an MBA, I went to Wharton and got my MBA, specialized in marketing. And I actually loved my MBA experience. I know sometimes MBAs, we get a little bit of flack for being, too by the book or too whatever, right? Straight laced. I don't know what the stereotypes are, but I value the experience, particularly as someone, as I said, who had studied history as an undergrad, to come in and just be able to say, okay, what does an income statement look like? What is LIFO and FIFO accounting, right? Like all those types of things that you go over, just some of the nuts and bolts. How do you discount a cash flow, right? How do you think about the future value of money, right? Like some of those things are just fundamental skills that I valued. So it's a really long answer to your question, but I wouldn't change my education. I think the balance of the humanities with a pretty typical business education, I think, is a good combo for me.
Yeah, when I think about an MBA, I think there's always that argument of is it needed? But I think someone who doesn't have the business background, you're the ideal candidate. At the end of the day, you're actually learning stuff. I mean, you think of folks that went to school undergrad for business. I mean, they're relearning the same stuff. So you really were able to fill any sort of knowledge gap. So
it also enabled me to start the career that I wanted to have. So this is another thing, not to get on my soapbox too much, right? But it's like after my MBA, I got married, I had 2 children. I wanted to be able to go and earn a comfortable salary and a living, right? Like I didn't, the idea that I would just like sleep out of my car and start the business. Like there's always these stories of entrepreneurship. There's like, you gotta be this like, rough and tumble on the brink of bankruptcy. And it's like, that's not the case, right? Like we are, at the end of the day, business people who saw an opportunity and we wanted to build something to take advantage of it. And to me, there's no problem with taking a gradual progression towards doing that. So that's my one thing. I want to break the myth of the swashbuckling entrepreneur, right? You can be measured in your approach, I think, and have success as well.
For sure. Now, what are some key takeaways that you've learned since you started the business?
Right now, the one that's top of mind for me is just the importance of people, human resources, culture, right? I think I started my career working at a really big company where candidly those things were just a little easier to manage, right? The culture was very clearly established by hundreds of people before me. You put out a job post, you might get 20 or 50 applications for every position, right? And so I think in general, the task of team building at a large established company is a little easier versus here at a dozen cousins. I feel like, I'm being interviewed just as much as I'm interviewing others, right? It's a very two-way process where people are trying to determine like, okay, do I believe in this person? Do I believe in his vision, his mission? Do I believe in his ability to execute it, right? Will I enjoy working here? And so it's a lot more like of a dynamic process. And I feel as a result, I've gotten better at, I think, identifying people who will be the right fit for the company, screening them in an efficient way, telling the story and laying out the vision for the company. And that's not to say I'm perfect at those things, but I think definitely something I've learned is just the importance of people and how to, best use human capital. That's one thing I would say. I think another thing I've learned is just how to keep an even keel or more even keel, right? I think as you guys know, the ups and downs of working in an early stage business is very extreme, right? Like, it might sometimes be 1 hour to the next, you know what I mean? Like you get off a great meeting and you're like, okay, we're rolling. Then the next meeting is a crisis that you have to deal with, right? And so I think I've gotten a lot better at just kind of, staying even keeled, staying in the middle, right? The highs aren't as high as you think they are. The lows aren't as low. And that's been a skill, I think, that I've been able to build out a little bit.
Yeah, that's good. I feel like you're on a roller coaster sometimes. So I have to get better at doing that, actually staying even keeled, because we ride it and we're feeling it both ways.
Yeah.
But okay, I have some personal questions for you. So obviously this startup life is not always the most glamorous. It's a lot of hard work. What would you do if you just had a week off to yourself from a dozen cousins? What do you do?
Man, that's a great question. Number one is just the sleep. My sleep level would go up like 20 or 30%. You know what I mean? Like I have between two young children in the company, I'm not always getting the level of sleep that I want or know I should be getting. So that's the one thing I think if I had a week off, I would just digest. And then the second thing I think would actually just be to consume a little bit more like culture and content. You know, there's so many books that I want to read, films that I want to watch, shows that I want to watch that just I don't have the time always to get to it. So I feel like, one out of every 10 things that I want to consume, I actually am able to. And so with the week, I probably just indulge myself a little bit, get caught up on some of the Oscar and Emmy nominees and all that kind of good stuff.
That's awesome. This is a little bit of a deeper question. So what is your superpower and why?
Yeah, I'll say, and of course, in all humility, like what other people say is just the ability to prioritize and focus. I think I'm pretty good at knowing if something is worth investing time, money, effort into, right? And I'm also good at cutting the cord when it's time to cut the cord. You know what I mean? And so we don't waste a lot of the team's time and energy on stuff that's like, I've had that at different times in my career where it's like everyone working on the project knows this is a waste of time, or they don't think it's going to work, but it's like they have to do it, right? Somebody told them and nobody wants to stop it. And so I came into this company really trying to be very focused on that, right? Which is like everything people are working on needs to be high value, high impact, something that they can believe in. Once we realize that that's not the case, we got to be brave enough to cut the cord. So that's what I would say.
Great answer. Love that.
So what are some brands that inspire you, that you're kind of all about right now, that excite you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll say some of my favorites. Right, first of all, Diaspora, which is a Bay Area based spice company, probably one of my favorite brands, just in terms of what they're doing. Basically it's all about paying a fair wage to spice growers and really rooted in India. And so I think just love the mission and the products and what Sana does there. So that's one of my favorites for sure. Capital City is a condiment company. They make mambo sauce. Mambo sauce is like a regional condiment in like the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. I'll probably eat 1 or 2 bottles of this sauce every month. It's great. It's like kind of a sweet, tangy hot sauce, just to paint the picture of it. But that's another brand that I love. Trying to think of some others in the food space. Partake is a brand that I also love. Denise is a friend and fellow founder. She's all about allergen-friendly snacking and foods. I could probably go on and on, but those are 3 that come to my mind pretty quickly.
Partake is it's actually in our fridge all the time. My wife, I don't even know if she's supposed to keep them in the fridge, but they're always in my fridge. I don't know why.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wanted to put out a disclaimer that they are shelf stable. So if you want, maybe you get some extra shelf life out of them, but I do think that they can be outside the fridge.
I'm a fan of Denise's though too. She's awesome. She was cool. They were launching it at Trader Joe's, and we had a few conversations though. She's great.
Very cool.
So Ibraheem, what's something you wish you knew before starting that you learned on your journey?
Yeah, I would say like one thing that I wish I understood more coming in is just the importance of timing and luck with regards to the success you'll have. In our case, I feel like we've always been on the wrong side of D2C, right? Like our timing has just never fully aligned. When we first started the company, it was a small channel for food and beverage. It was something that I intentionally deprioritized. We focused on retail. We focused on Amazon. Then COVID happened. And of course, you had this like 12 to 18 month period when consumers were just online buying whatever they could. And, I felt like we then were chasing it. By the time we got up and running with D2C, ad costs skyrocketed. And so it went back to being like a not super attractive channel for us, right? And so it's like we've never had a really healthy D2C business, even though it's like I could look at the line and tell you exactly when we should have been online, what we should have been doing, you know what I mean, when we should have gotten out or started de-investing or, lowering investment. And so, that's one of those things where it's like, on the flip side, I've seen other brands that rode that perfectly, right? Where it's like, they launched online at the right time, had a success, rolled into retail at the right time. And so sometimes there's nothing you can do. Like, it's just luck, you know what I mean? Or the timing is right. And that's one area where we missed it. And so I think it's just important, something important to keep in mind. It's important to timing.
Yeah, I mean, when we think about it, you see brands that are successful, you always try to figure out, like, what do they do different, right? You have to have a good product. It's table stakes, like the number one, the brand's got to work. You got to have good operators, but then ultimately, you said luck. It plays such a big piece, and that's the one variable that you can't really control. But you just hope that you make more right decisions than wrong ones, and you hope that at some point luck's on your side.
Yeah, for sure. We talked a little bit before about like me studying history, and I think that's also a lesson I would say I tie to history a lot. Like, major events aren't the result, first of all, always of like careful planning or clear drivers. Sometimes like 1,000 little things, or sometimes just one super random lucky thing, a random event that occurs, right? And it's like, it's hard even hearing you say, like, looking at other brands, and we're all, I'm sure, guilty of this, right? Look at other brands and I wonder what they're doing or what's their secret to X, Y, Z. And it's like, sometimes they don't even know, right? Like, they're just living, right? They're playing it out. They're kind of observing their environment, seeing what's out there. It's hard to replicate it or to try to do it again because the world is different now, right? Yeah. Even 2 years later, 3 years later, will work for that brand might not work for you. So I try to live in the moment and do the best we can with it.
Well, can you let the listeners know where they can find a Dozen Cousins at retail and online?
Yeah, number one starting point is to come visit us on our website, www.adozencousins.com. We have a store locator. You can also purchase directly through the website. In terms of major retailers, you can find us at Target, Walmart, Kroger, Whole Foods. Most of your local kind of mass and grocery chains will have us in some footprint, but starting our website will point you in the right direction.
Awesome. And what about online?
You can find us on Amazon, Thrive, Hungry Root, Hive, Boxed. We try to spread the love. So again, find us on your favorite digital retailer as well.
Awesome. You've been busy, it sounds like. What about social media? Where can listeners find you?
Find us on Instagram. That's really our home base, if you will. A Dozen Cousins on Instagram. We share a ton of food, culture, recipes, and try to have fun with the brand.
Awesome. Well, Ibraheem, really, really awesome hearing your story and journey and kind of the different approach you took. And appreciate your time today.
I appreciate you guys for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining, man.